Hello, and welcome to Alteryx Tooltip Multi-Row Formula Tool Demo. My name is Alyssa Williams, and I'm the Alteryx Technical Lead here at Lovelytics, a data analytics consulting company. Today, I'm going to walk you guys through how to use the multi-row tool to calculate a conditional running total, as well as apply tiered discounts to sales charges. You could apply the same logic to tiered pricing examples or to calculating taxes that are due based on tiered tax brackets, for instance, like what you would find in the United States federal tax rates. As we jump into our workflow, let's go ahead and take a look at our inputs. Our first input is our volume pricing discount packages. And for each package and each tier, we have the lower and upper range of that tier, as well as the associated discount rate for the dollars within that tier. Our second input is some transactional data. Essentially what we have here is for each customer, we've identified the volume pricing discount package that should be applied. And then we also have their total gross charge usage amounts for the month. Once we join all of this data together, essentially what we have is for each customer, we have their total gross charge, as well as the different tier buckets that we'll be dividing that charge into to calculate their net charge amount. From here, we're going to go ahead and add our first multi-row tool. So from the preparation tool palette, kind of towards the middle, you'll see this multi-row formula tool. We're going to drag it and drop it into our workflow. And essentially what this tool allows you to do is create calculations that reference prior or subsequent row results for different columns. I'm going to take a moment and just walk you guys through the configuration panel for the tool. You have the ability to update an existing field within your data, or like in our case, we're going to create a new field in our data called tier running total. You have the ability to change field types and sizes for new fields in this tool as well. The next kind of piece of the configuration window is this number of rows feature, which if you watch my variables down here in the middle section, as I increase this, essentially what that allows you to do is reference prior rows. So for instance, the first prior row, the second prior row, the third prior row, etc., or subsequent rows in your data. For our use case today, we're just going to go ahead and keep this at 1. You'll also have the option to group your data. So for instance, if you look at our data coming into the tool, since we're calculating a running total, we could potentially group our data by customer because we wouldn't want the running total calculated for customer A to calculate the running total calculated for customer B. Because I have my data sorted by customer and by tier, and we can actually utilize this tier 1 value in the row to identify new customer data, I'm going to leave our group by function unchecked for the purposes of this demo. In the middle section, you have the variables that are available for reference and calculations. So for instance, I can reference the prior row of any column in my data. I can reference the current row of any column in my data, or I could reference the next row of any column in my data. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this to build out our expression for this multi-row formula tool. As I mentioned before, we're going to utilize this tier 1 identifier to identify kind of the starting point for our running total. So essentially what we're going to say here is if our current tier equals tier 1, then what do we want to happen? Essentially, tier 1 running total should always be this kind of upper limit of tier 1, unless, of course, the total usage charge for the month is actually less than that upper limit. So in the case of customer D, for instance, the upper limit is $4.99, but we wouldn't want to charge them the $4.99, only the $77. So what we're going to do here is we're going to utilize the min function to take either that upper tier for tier 1, or if the total charge for the month is less than that, then we're only going to charge them, their actual monthly amount. The next piece to our expression is going to be how to handle each subsequent tier. So in our example here, it's how to handle tier 2, how to handle tier 3. but this could extend to any number of tiers that might exist within your data. As with any running total, we always want to reference the previous running total result. So for instance, the starting point of tier 2's running total should be the running total result of tier 1. To do this, we're going to use this row -1 feature that's available in our variables to reference the row -1 tier running total. So in this case, our kind of starting point for tier 2 is the $99. That's the upper range of tier 1. We want to add to this our next tier's running total. So kind of if we're at tier 2, what's the tier 2 value to add to our running total formula? Because we don't want this value to exceed the upper range of the tier. So for instance, this $499, we want to reuse that minimum function again. So essentially we want to take the minimum value of the total usage. So our current row's usage amount, but we want to make sure we back out our prior tiers running total because those dollars have already been allocated to a prior tier. So we're going to back out this row -1 tier running total. Or we want to take, if it's smaller, the upper range of the tier. So our current row's upper range. And essentially what this says is if we use our customer A, for instance, they're $742. But we want to back out the $99 that were allocated to tier 1. But because the tier 2 value, this $742 minus the $99, actually exceeds the upper range of the tier, the $499, then this value is actually just going to be the $499 because we don't want that tier to, we don't want the value to exceed the upper range of the tier. When we wrap out this expression and we run the workflow, essentially what you have here is the tier running total, which is kind of the tier amount growing over time. And by the time you get to the final tier, so in this case, tier 3, your tier running total should equal the gross usage charge. Our next step in this is that we need to actually calculate the dollars that fall into each of these tiers. So how we're going to do that is we're going to add another multi-row formula tool. And we're going to call this our tier charge level. So we're going to add a new field. And what this new field is going to do is it's going to actually calculate the dollars that fall into each of these tier buckets. So similar to our previous multi-row tool configuration, we're going to create a new field. We're not going to change any of the number of rows or group by features. And we're going to start our expression off with what should happen when we're at tier 1. So that new customer value. And essentially, if you're at tier 1, essentially all we want to do for that tier level is just reuse this tier running total that we calculated in our previous tool. So we're just going to add in our current row tier running total. Next, again, we have to figure out how to handle each subsequent tier that might occur within our data. And essentially the way to think of this is we're going to reuse that min function again. And it's going to be the minimum value of our current tier's running total. So for instance, this $598. Then we need to back out the prior tier's running total because those dollars have already been allocated to a different tier. So our current tier running total minus our prior tier running total. Or because we don't want to exceed the upper range of the tier, we're going to set that minimum feature again to not exceed the upper range. And that's kind of our function to calculate each tier bucket. And when I run this, you'll see what I mean. So here we had our running total that we calculated. And as we said before, the final tier of our running total should equal our total gross usage charge amount. But our tier charge level is actually divvying up those $742 to each tier level for that customer. So the total of this tier charge level should equal the gross usage charge amount. And we're going to use that later as a check to make sure that all of our calculations are working as expected. The next item that we want to calculate here, so if we bring in a formula tool, we're just going to calculate some standard formulas. And essentially what we're going to do is, using this tier charge level, we're actually going to apply the associated discount for that tier. So we're going to go ahead and add a column, and we're going to call it usage tiered charge. So we're kind of mimicking the usage gross charge. This is going to be the net charge to apply to that specific customer's transactions. So the tier charge level, the tier charge level that we calculated, and we're going to multiply that by the discount rate. So in this case, 1 minus our discount, and we're going to go ahead and set the field type to this to double. Next, what we can do is we can actually add a column and calculate the actual discount, which would be a new column of discount. And what this is actually going to be is that tier charge level that we calculated. And we're going to go ahead and subtract from that the usage tiered charge that we calculated here, so that the actual dollar discount associated with that discount percent is visible. From here, I've already added in how we're going to summarize this information. We want to kind of summarize this information to get it back to the end result that we're shooting for, so that by each customer, we're able to see kind of the gross charge, the net charge, and the associated discount. And then we're going to go ahead and add in this validation to make sure everything's working as expected. So our summarize tool here is just grouping by our customer information and pulling in the sum of the different charge levels for each tier. As I said before, we've got a validation check in here, where essentially we want to make sure that the gross usage charge from the transactional data equals the tiered usage charge that we calculated in our multi-row formula. Just set this to a Boolean data type so that we can see true or false. And I've sorted our data accordingly here by customer, so that the final result of our workflow output is that by customer, we have their total gross charge, their total net charge, the associated discount, and a check to make sure that everything is working as expected. I hope you have found this demo helpful, and I challenge you to try out the multi-row formula tool by downloading the workflow from the Alteryx community page. There's a link to that in the description for the video. I appreciate you taking the time to watch, and I hope you found it useful. Thank you.